Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of the Geopolitical Pickle. My name is Juan Muñoz and as always I'm joined by my colleague Ronan Wordsworth. How are you, Ronan?
I'm going quite well, thank you. Trying to brave the winter here in Prague. It's not been too fierce. I know people in the US and Canada might have been hit by a recent cold snap, but for us, it's been pretty fine actually. I think.
Do you remember when we got here when the prices of electricity rose massively and suddenly? I remember for the second winter that I was here, my heater was turned off for the entire winter just because the electricity was like 3 times the price that I was paying in the beginning, something like this.
But yes, overall,
it's fine now.
What about you? How are you doing?
Well, I am fine. Working in some projects. As always, tired of working. If the podcast ends up being financially stable, I will be really happy. For the time being, obviously we share this with our jobs, and lately for both of our jobs we've been busy with what we want to talk about today, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Because since the beginning of the year, unless you've been living inside a cave, you know, but I think the headline will be Trump is an attention seeker. That's how I would call it in a way. I don't know if you agree.
I mean, this is not really new. I would say this is kind of Trump's MO. We saw it in Trump presidency version 1.0. We saw it even prior to enter politics. Trump likes the limelight, and I guess, as you say,
build big buildings, no?
Exactly, the best buildings.
Best buildings.
But the reason we thought, okay, today we really want to address this issue because I think it's kind of a contentious topic. It's something, if you're paying attention, that he talked about a lot on the campaign trail. But for a lot of people, including the markets, it came as a massive shock just a couple of weekends ago when Trump announced that he was going to be slapping 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, 10% tariff on China, and Trump's love of this word tariff. He's said multiple times on the campaign trail, it's the most beautiful word in the English language, as well as the Bible and Jesus and love, I think, and tariff. Those are all kind of the top words in a Trump mind frame, apparently.
In the Trump dictionary. We can start.
The Trump dictionary.
The Trump dictionary. So, yeah, this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about these tariffs that have been on the spotlight for the last couple of weeks. There's been many things going on around the early Trump presidency. We can definitely speak about Elon Musk at one point, or the Panama Canal, or Greenland.
Yeah, we might touch on some of these other things during the discussion today, but I think tariffs, especially being such a essential tool of geoeconomics and part of a state's basically economic toolkit that they can use as leverage, and the US being the largest, or kind of toing and froing with China as the world's largest economy, can then wield these tariffs and how they work, what are their purpose, what was potentially the geopolitical reasons behind these tariffs, and so on and so forth.
So let's start then. What are tariffs?
Okay, so simply put, a tariff is a tax on an imported good paid by the importer at time of import. So this really means it's not paid by the country that is sending the good. It's paid within your own country that's placing the tariff on the good. So for a practical example, you're getting oil from Canada. He's saying we're going to put tariffs on the oil. The refinery company, presumably BP, Shell, one of these companies, is then going to pay that additional fee to the government of the USA for importing that good from Canada. So what's really important to note is that it's paid within their own economy. It's an extra tax kind of going to the government, another form of revenue stream. But it does make foreign goods more expensive within the local domestic market.
So it's basically used, or it has historically been used to disincentivize purchasing outside and incentivize purchasing inside. In the case, for example, of crude oil that you're saying from Canada, it would the idea at least behind of the concept of tariffs is to incentivize that this company, instead of buying this crude oil from Canada, it would buy it from, I don't know exactly which state of the US does it, but it would buy directly from there.
Exactly. I mean, for me, I think there's a few major economic reasons, potentially, besides the political reasons that you would use tariffs. First one, you're trying to make your domestic industries more competitive with different industries abroad. This can be because maybe your product is a higher quality, domestic is what costs more to produce. It could be because the labor costs in your market are higher, so the people are getting paid more, which makes your product less competitive. Or it could be that maybe you have stricter environmental regulations, which then obviously puts an extra burden of cost that might not be in a different market. So that's the first one, to make your domestic industry more competitive. The second might be to encourage a foreign company then to invest in your country with potentially, say, a good example might be an automotive vehicle manufacturer. Encourage them to come and produce the same vehicle within your local market, and say any VWs that are constructed within the USA obviously will not be subject to tariffs, whereas VWs that are imported from Germany straight to USA will be. So you're encouraging this kind of localization of the production. The third could be potentially as a form of revenue stream for the government. As I said, like obviously this is going to bring money in basically as a different form of tax without saying it's a tax on people. They will feel it because companies are very notorious for passing on these expenses to the end consumer, be that you or me or any of our listeners.
Don't anger the shareholders. Don't anger the shareholders.
And like the last possible reason economically that I can see why you would use a tariff is to pressure other countries to give you better trade terms. Maybe access to their market. Obviously we see Trump use this as a pressure tactic a lot, but then you get maybe favorable access to their market for your goods over a third country C, so that then Canadian companies are more likely to buy American goods than British goods, for instance. So those are the four main economic reasons I can see.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that tariffs are something that have been really normal in international trade until post-World War II globalization comes into place, literally promoted by the United States, promoted these free trade agreements, but tariffs have been everywhere, basically. Actually, mercantilism, for example, practiced by the Dutch or the English before, was basically based also. They also had these tariffs, and they were some of the economic reasons that you were explaining here are the reasons why tariffs have been applied historically, also to gain, for example, in the case of the United States, prior Civil War and right after the Civil War, they input these tariffs so that with the objective that their economy would be more resilient against their industry would be more resilient against, for example, the British Empire's industry and so on. But in the last 60, 70 years, there's been a push towards more liberalization of this trade. Even countries that still have a lot of tariffs, well, many countries still have a lot of tariffs unless you are in a free trade zone. For example, within the European Union, there's free trade, but the countries of the European Union do have some tariffs, although not too high, depending on the industry, but they do have tariffs on foreign products. Now, again, not something new, but it is new that you impose these tariffs to your biggest trade partners, with which, in the case of Canada and Mexico, you have a signed free trade deal. First one coming back to the 1990s, and then renewed by the Trump administration in 2018. So this is where it comes as new.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as you said, tariffs are not new. They're still definitely used quite a lot. That's why, for me, the tariffs against China are not that surprising. We see they only said 10% tariff on China. That was surprising from the headline figure, why it was less than Mexico and Canada. But we have to remember Biden had already administered a lot of tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the US. So Trump is obviously continuing them. And then Biden continued those and added to them. And now Trump is just proposing an extra 10% tariff on Chinese goods. And as well, if we see in the European markets, like you said, there's been a big push for a unity against Chinese electric vehicles coming into the EU market to be able to promote European vehicle manufacturers to be able to compete with the Chinese EVs, which are able to produce a fraction of the cost, partially because of Chinese competitive advantage in producing the batteries which are needed in EVs. But that's where we can see they're not new at all. I think what is new, as you say, is this use of them, and potentially, I think also the way he's used it as a blanket tariff. It's not targeted industries.
Yeah, to all goods.
To all goods coming from a market, which then potentially is going to harm your own industries internally. We saw a massive panic between the Canadian, Mexican, and US manufacturing associations at the thought of these tariffs going through, because it would definitely make all three countries less competitive on the global market. And basically, it was, most economists think that Canada and Mexico would both have gone into recession within very short period of time had these tariffs gone through, which they are on pause at the moment. So who knows how it's going to play out in the future. But then we can see it's kind of new to be used as this kind of weapon, which I would say is kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's going to cause massive inflation within the US if they were to go through. Like
in basic products, for example, coming from Mexico.
I mean, Trump's whole election promises, whether he's going to bring prices down, blah, blah, blah. This is baffling then that he would propose blanket 25% tariffs on Mexican and Canadian goods, which is only going to serve to increase local prices in the US.
Yeah, no, that's clearly the new aspect of these tariffs. Again, well, you've said it. No, tariffs. It's the most beautiful word in the English dictionary. Tariffs. But then what is the motivation behind this? We've seen that when the tariffs were announced, the tariffs during the campaign were announced to...
There's a few reasons.
There were a few reasons.
First of all, he wanted to address the so-called unfair trade balance between...
Subsidizing Canada.
Which, let me be very clear, that is a nonsensical statement. Mm-hmm. Because when Trump says he's subsidizing Canada, he's saying that the US imports much more of the Canadian goods than Canada imports of the US. But to me, that is clearly extremely illogical, given the discrepancies in population. And this is something that never gets brought up by Trump because it's an inconvenient truth and goes against this narrative of them subsidizing Canadian industries, which is kind of a nonsense, I think. But as you say, that was one of the main reasons that he said on the campaign trail, we need to fix these unfair trade practices, even though Canada, Mexico, US are all trading under NAFTA and the revised NAFTA that Trump himself signed, as you said. The second one was he wants to bring back this new industrial age to America. This is part of the Make America Great Again whole slogan.
There's a lot of slogans.
There's a lot of slogans. He's got plenty. He's a man with many slogans. But part of that is this idea that he can bring back this big industry, which if we look at a lot of American kind of industrial-based cities, they're shells of their former self because they've all closed down in a lot of these heavy industries in the US just simply by the fact that they're not competitive. As we said, if your labor costs are high, if your different environmental regulations, et cetera, are there, you're going to be less competitive on the global market. And I don't know how that's going to play out with also deporting most of your cheap labor force. How are you going to then square that circle to bring back competitive industries besides implementing massive tariffs, which is just going to cause massive inflation in your country and kind of create this spiraling negative economic effect? But that's
I feel like you're not seeing the turnaround here, my friend, because the prison system in the United States is mostly privatized. So
that's true.
To come back 100 years and put your prisoners your prisoners to work on the fields. I mean, it wouldn't be at this point. It wouldn't be the craziest proposal that I've heard coming from the Trump administration. To be fair.
I mean, the third major thing you said, we've got to protect jobs in America. I mean, that's kind of tied into the last point as well. He's got to protect the existing jobs, make new jobs, bring back industry. And then the fourth, which is the real reason that he used them now, was to leverage other countries to do his bidding. He said this time was due to migration and fentanyl, but then to be able to use it as basically this tool of economic power to kind of get other countries to do what he wants, I think.
Do you think that there's been, in the end, as we've mentioned already, these tariffs on Mexico and Canada have been postponed for at least a month? I watched a press conference from Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, saying that when she had the second conversation after the threats, that Trump asked her, well, how long should we pause this? And she was like, according to what she says in the press conference, she was like, well, like indefinitely?
Yeah.
To what? Apparently there's a silence, and then they agreed in 1 month.
They had a little chuckle.
They had a little chuckle there. And the result has been Canada has announced an agreement, a proposal of border control that they are announced on 19th December 2024.
But it got re-announced now because...
But it was re-announced because this is the victory of
I mean, Trump's got to sell... He's got to sell the product, right? I think, as we said, there's a lot of negatives for these tariffs. It didn't really make sense. I think Mexico, on one hand, okay, there is some legitimacy to the fentanyl claim, whether these extra 10,000 border guards, which were agreed from Mexico and US to go to the border, are going to have any effect on slowing the fentanyl trade. I'm not really sure about that.
I can give you a couple good arguments against this in the early 21st century on how militarization against the cartels went really wrong for the Mexican government and like came in the situation that we are right now, where the Mexican government is even weaker. I don't think we have we don't have an episode on that. We do have some explanation about the Mexican cartels and how important it is that the United States is there for these cartels to flourish. So I'd say there's more measures to take than adding 10,000 soldiers to the border.
I would agree completely. And in return, apparently, the US has promised to attempt to stop the flow of illegal weapons coming across to these cartels. Obviously, the cartels are oftentimes better armed than the Mexican state. And these weapons are not coming from nowhere. They're coming across the border from the US. And I think it's maybe wishful thinking to think that Washington is going to do anything about that when we all know how influential and powerful the gun lobby is in the US. And that's backed by the manufacturers. They're making plenty of money out of the cartels and the ongoing war on drugs. So again, it seems like a lot of showmanship rather than substance. I mean, again, Mexico has had a huge immigration problem going into the US, but that had largely declined over the past 12 months and had already begun declining even more once Trump's deportations started taking place. So I don't think it carries the same weight as it once did maybe in 2022 when there was massive numbers of undocumented migrants crossing the border from Mexico. For Canada, it never really made much sense to me. It's baffling. It's like, what can Canada offer?
I read some data. There's more illegal immigrants going from the US to Canada than from Canada to the US. Like it's some 10,000 difference.
And like you said, like weapon flow that way is also going to be problematic. The fentanyl coming from Canada into the US is laughably low. If we look at it, it's about 1/10,000th the amount of what was coming from the southern border. So I think Prime Minister Trudeau would have just been wondering what possible negotiations Trump could have been looking for, especially when we consider that Canada has been such a loyal ally to the US through history, but even in recent times.
Yes.
Obviously, Canada has their own relationship with China, for instance, but they've been very, maybe not happy, but they've always followed the US lead on tariffs on China, even arresting the president of Huawei's daughter under the command of the US, who then just went on to drop the charges completely. So it became a diplomatic incident between Canada and China, brought about by the US. I mean, as I said, Canada's always been very loyal to the US.
The Justin Trudeau's press conference to our beloved brothers in the United States of America. I mean, literally, like the entire... I found interest in the communication because I feel like it's part... I think it's going to be... It's always been really important to analyze what is said, but I think it's even more important right now because it shows... Like, this has shown a clear break in the relations between the United States and Canada. How it was... I think, honestly, a lasting, at least during Trump's campaign, this distrust towards the United States from Canada. Whereas, like, it's really, like, in the press conference, Trudeau talks about the American people as their best friends in the world, their family, and literally talks and addresses the American people like, unfortunately, this is going to affect the Canadian people, but this is also going to affect you, American
Interestingly, I haven't seen such unity from the two sides of Canadian politics in a long time to supporting Trudeau's message there as well. I mean, this is kind of pushing back against Trump's claims about being the 51st state as well. I mean, we'll touch on that in a moment, I think, but I just want to go back to this idea of the distrust between Canada and the US, and then expand that to the US as a whole, because I have a thought. I mean, obviously, he's already said he's going to go after the EU next. Again, they are the closest ally. But if we look at the net result of all this, it's like the US is never going to be seen as a reliable trading partner, a reliable ally, not just in terms of trade, but in terms of defense, in terms of all sorts of things, if you're acting in this way towards these countries which are your very close allies. And for Europe, for instance, where does that leave them? They're between US and China. They've been much more favorable towards the US market than the Chinese market. Maybe a shift from 10 years ago where they were much more open to Chinese market.
but still much closer to the...
It's too much closer to exactly. And they've been closing that door to the Chinese. And this kind of, to me, gives an opportunity for China to step back in and say, well, with us, you know what you're going to get. It's not going to be this random toing and froing depending on the whims of a president on the day. Obviously, we know Xi has significant, almost unilateral power over the government systems there. And so it's consistent. You know what you're going to get from China. Maybe you can negotiate over time, but you're not going to get these huge flip-flops back and forth. One day you've got 25% tariffs. Next day you say we're going to re-announce a plan which we already had in place, and then the tariffs are off for a month. Who knows what's going to happen in a month's time when that apparent window is closing, but that's to be seen how that plays out.
I think I remember when the Nord Stream 2 blew up, I remember some people here that we know told me that this was clearly a Russian strategy that was basically like steering the wheel or something like this, like doing something really crazy so that it's unexpected. To me, this like the uncertainty that you create as a trade partner makes that progressively your trade partners are going to at least start searching elsewhere. You know, like now Canada cannot, like they don't know how the situation is going to be with the United States. They can sell oil, for example. You can sell it to the European Union. We make a fast trade agreement. I'm pretty sure the European Union will be really happy to get Canadian oil and gas. Timber, stuff like this.
The difficulty there, I think, for Canadian oil is I know the grade of the oil is different and it's set up for Canadian and US refineries. Mm-hmm. So it's not that easy to change the markets. But then again, the oil and gas got the lowest tariffs.
We can start taking maple syrup.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually do like maple syrup.
Exactly. We'll take some maple syrup.
Specifically that they sell here in Czech Republic that I really, really like. And it's got the Canadian flag on it. So we can definitely do that. We can help the Canadians. I want to touch a little bit on the EU and the threat to impose tariffs in the EU. And my first question would be, so what would be the reason? And I have an answer.
we need Greenland to secure our security, so we're going to impose tariffs in the EU until they give us a favorable whatever with Greenland. 3 days later, the tariffs are withdrawn because because the United States will be able to station troops in Greenland. They are already there, but
exactly. I think the only very important, so the only military base on Greenland is a US base already. So all this bluster about not being secure is again quite theatrical. I think what might be more at play is something to do with the critical minerals which are there on Greenland and are basically not able to be mined because of environmental reasons. Obviously, there's a massive glacier there, and most of the island is protected land. And so, again,
were mining before, and they banned the mining because of how impactful it was.
Exactly. So I think part of it could be this Republican idea that they can get access to use it, not necessarily to own Greenland, as he says, but if they can then own these mining sites which are under their control, that's much more important, I believe, than any sort of we need to control it for military protecting the free world purposes when, as you said, they already have a military base there. It's not like Greenland is under any imminent threat. If we think strategically, maybe he thinks it's kind of an outpost that can protect the US on its eastern flank. But
maybe say
the Russian...
the trade route over the Arctic now that
exactly.
Climate change is, and they have the icebreakers and so on.
Exactly. So there's the Arctic trade route, which is accessible for at least a quarter of the year now by the Russian icebreaker fleet, for instance, going up and around Greenland, which could then potentially pose some sort of perceived threat. But other than that, I can't see any major reason, unless we actually take it seriously and then we're back to a situation where we think about Trump and this idea of imperial America being this version of Make America Great Again, where it becomes a conquering power. Then it ties into Canada being the 51st state, Greenland, Panama Canal. We're going to take back the Panama Canal. And then even just in the last few days, last week, we've seen him talk about the US taking over the Gaza Strip. And I don't know how seriously we take Trump. He says a lot of things. Some of it is for his audience. Some of it is serious. And maybe some of it's to try and shift the window on what is acceptable. But he's saying all these things. I don't know at what point we take him seriously as trying to bring back this imperial America.
That's the most uncertain part of it, isn't it? Because in the end, we really don't know. With most countries, when we do analysis here, with most leaders and so on, even like when we analyze things that we disagree, we can find a reasoning behind a geopolitical reasoning. Maybe it's economy, maybe an imperialist thought, it may be historical claim, and maybe we after analyzing it, we can definitely point at
some logic.
This is what's driving this.
Yeah.
We may disagree, we may find it illogical even, but we understand that there is a logic in what they think.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest issue that we have right now, that it doesn't seem to be much logic. To me, the only logic is laws after laws, comments after comments, to have the internal demand of action, MAGA information, to have them, fed every day.
By something that is happening.
Yeah, if it's not...
it could well be, and I mean, I think that's a dangerous precedent for what elections are going to look like going forward, not just in America, but how that then permeates into other democracies across Europe, for instance, and seeing like this need for the politicians to be this theatrical identity that then is spawning whatever may be popular at the moment. And I think it is dangerous going forward, and we'll see. It definitely is quite possible that is the reason behind a lot of this. But again, we have to wait and see on how some of this plays out, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, there's also a lot of information coming on. I have the feeling that there is a saturation of, like a purposeful saturation of the information sphere, which allows you basically to literally 1 week ago, well, less than 1 week, it was this week, we were talking about the tariffs, And then within the American media, they were talking about Elon Musk's agency. I can't remember.
Department of Government Efficiency.
Yeah, like the cryptocurrency. No, it's called Dodge.
Correct.
Cutting down all the funding for USAID, which is
The world's largest aid provider. I mean, there's many
globally.
there's many NGOs that are going to be affected by this. I think part of it is this maybe takeover of the US government by Trump and Musk, and this ideology. You can see a lot of Musk's ideology permeating into how Trump acts as well. Obviously, Musk was a big financial backer for Trump, very prominent at his rallies in the lead up to the election. And
Was giving out $1 million a day.
yeah, exactly. And so we see now that we've got the dispute with South Africa, which has started up. Basically, I don't think Trump really cares much about South Africa, but this is Musk's homeland, and he's accused the government of being anti-white racist, and then they've cut off funding there. He said that USAID is a nest full of spiteful vipers, and that basically they need to be taken apart. So I think we are likely to see more of this going forward. It is quite undermining of the US system. I did read a great article actually that just went into how Trump's presidency is just exposing how fragile the American democracy is, and how the whole thing was built on a system of norms. And these norms were basically things...
Were accepted and reproduced.
Exactly.
Someone doesn't do it anymore.
Exactly. That executive orders can't just be written to overwrite what the legislative branch of the government says. However, we've seen now that the Department of Government Efficiency, so-called, which was not an official branch, has been taken under the executive branch, is now actually shutting down government departments, which in terms of what would be thought acceptable even 2 years ago would be crazy. But I think this is what we see, this erosion of norms in the internal politics, but then even in the rhetoric around tariffs, around how you treat your allies, in rhetoric around all these different imperialist ambitions. And I think this is a big thing. As you said, it's flooding the media space, and it'll be an interesting few years if this is how the first month of Trump's time in office is kicked off.
No, I mean, we'll definitely have to talk about it more because there's more things coming. For example, we haven't touched upon we wanted to focus on tariffs. We haven't touched upon, for example, Trump pushing Taiwan to relinquish their entire semiconductor industry and place it in the US, which would literally leave Taiwan without leverage against the PRC. We haven't talked much about the Panama Canal. We have mentioned, but we haven't talked about the Middle East. So yeah, definitely this is going to be something to be studied. And well, we will be here talking about it and giving our opinions.
And trying to give you guys some guidance on how these things work in practice, and potentially the geopolitical reasons behind some of these moves.
But not only, I don't want Trump to be monopolizing our topics.
Of course.
We're going to be talking about more things. In any case, thank you very much for listening.
Welcome back for 2025.
And we'll see you next time in the next episode of the Geopolitical Pico.
The Geopolitical Pickle is created by Ronan Wordsworth and Juan Francisco Muñoz. Follow us on Instagram @The Geopolitical Pickle or Twitter @The Geopickle for more content, and follow us on every podcast platform.